Good afternoon, everybody. I think we're going to get started. Some people might join us on the way. We have a good number of participants already, so thank you very much for joining. My name's Steve Collins. I'm the SADC TFCA Network Coordinator. This webinar is part of a series that we're running this year. We had a few last year. These webinars really touch on topics which are of importance to people working within TFCAs, be they donors, be they government officials, be they NGO practitioners. These are topics which impact on us all. And I'm very happy today to say we will be looking at sustainable financing. As you are well aware, many of you, this year has been quite a shock for many of us working in the sector in terms of the withdrawal of American donor aid to the sector. So this is certainly topical. So, and I want to thank the Sustainable Finance Coalition for organizing this. And with that, I will hand over to Mariam Umaji, who will be facilitating the webinar. Over to you, Mariam.
Thank you, Steve. Welcome, everyone. So we were going to spend the next hour and a half together. Before I introduce myself and speak a bit about the project that is bringing us together here, just give you an overview of why we're here and how the proceedings today will go. So that's the agenda for today. You are stuck with me as your facilitator for the next hour and a half, but there are some important expertise coming in to share with you. So we'll have the Sustainable Finance Coalition founder and CEO, Candace, coming in. She'll speak after, and then we'll have our head of strategy, Kyra Lunderstand, and then we will have two speakers showcasing finance solutions. We'll have Betty Chebet from HWC Insurance from AB Etios, and we'll have a fellow coordinator, Rowan Leroux, speaking about biodiversity credits. We'll have question and answers, and then a short closing before we adjourn. Why are we here? You all know, Steve just also prompted us to have that reflection. We're living unprecedented times on what comes to funding, but TFCAs in general, being such a regional biodiversity, climate resilience, socio-economic leverage point in many countries, are facing unprecedented funding challenges. There are issues about long-term sustainability that is being hindered by fragmented investment, reliance on short-term and multiple donor funding work streams, and then inconsistency around those work streams. So through this webinar, we hope to showcase to you a few sustainable finance options that you can explore, and also open the dialogue on sustainable finance within the TFCA space. This support is possible because of GIZ and EU. This is a project that is starting now. I'm the Sustainable Finance Coordinator under that project. My name is Mariam. I'm a developed finance consultant working for more than 15 years in the space of governance, finance, fiduciary risk, all things money, 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 and now with the Sustainable Finance Coalition. The project, we call it the Sustainable Finance Coalition / TFCA project, and the objective of the project is to support, of course, the TFCAs in understanding what is sustainable finance, create the capacity to implement advanced sustainable finance. To do that, this is possible because we're the Sustainable Finance Coalition, and we have a finance model that supports in bringing sustainable finance into reality through and Candace will go into the details, so I'm not going to repeat them now. And basically, we will work with the selection of TFCAs. We can't support everyone, but there will be an evidence-based selection of a short list of TFCAs with whom we will partner to make them doers at scale, basically implementers of the model, unlocking the flow of funds they much need for conservation. With that, I'm going to introduce you to Candace. She's, again, as I said, the founder and CEO of the coalition. She has extensive expertise in sustainable finance, in green finance, and you will learn soon as well that she has an inclination on all things legal and tax. She is an award-winning speaker and expert, and she sits in, not only she started the coalition, but she's also a facilitator and co-chair of the YUCN Sustainable Finance Group. With that, I'm going to hand over to Candace. Candace, over to you.
Miriam, thank you so much. It's fantastic to be joining so many TFCA colleagues from all over SADC, and I can see based on the chat all over the world. It really is the Sustainable Finance Coalition's pleasure and privilege to be able to support TFCAs with sustainable financing, and we take that job quite seriously. I'm going to be unpacking a little bit more about the coalition, particularly about the finance model that Mariam alluded to. And as many of you will know, in engaging through the TFCA network, we've started the discussion around sustainable finance some time ago. It was fantastic to be with many colleagues on the Zambezi River in Livingston at the end of last year. And as promised, we have officially stepped into a position to be able to strategically support TFCAs with the use of the finance model and the coalition's Finance for Nature ecosystem. And really, the coalition's role is to be able to stand shoulder to shoulder with conservation actors, and in this case, the wide array of actors' expertise across multiple sectors in TFCAs, to start to begin putting in place finance solutions that go the distance, that are really able to achieve impact at scale. And I'm going to touch on exactly how we do that. And then Betty and Rowan will unpack two of the finance solutions that really have far-reaching consequences and impact for TFCAs. So with that, Mariam, if you wouldn't mind moving on to the next slides. So importantly, like I said, the coalition's role is to be able to stand shoulder to shoulder. We are not the only implementers of sustainable finance solutions. We really do believe in an all hands on deck approach. In order to drive sustainable finance, we need to do it collectively. We need to have as many organizations and as many individuals as possible working towards that ultimate goal. If we're continually reliant on the same sources of finance, whether it's tourism income or donor-based funding, Steve alluded to the USAID crisis that's unfolded, we're simply not going to have the resources at our disposal to really be able to leverage the opportunities that TFCAs afford us, and importantly, to undertake both the environmental and social objectives that we need to address in multiple countries, multiple landscapes, and multiple seascapes. So how do we actually go about unlocking those flows of sustainable finance? We often refer to what we do as being a locksmith. Different finance solutions require different mechanics to get them unlocked and to really open those doors to financial opportunity. And so we have condensed a wealth of knowledge, a wealth of expertise into a three-part finance model. And that really is the crux of what I want to be able to share this afternoon with everybody, because this finance model is available to all participants. It's something that we've used time and time again to unlock those flows of sustainable finance. And importantly, what we're seeing is that we can utilize the finance model in a myriad of complex landscapes and seascapes and with a multitude of different stakeholders. So often we get lost in the complexity of individual finance solutions, and we forget about the approach that we need to take to be able to identify the right finance solutions, how to design them effectively, and ultimately how to pull the resources and expertise needed to get those solutions over the finish line. So very simply, the finance model that the coalition uses and that we're going to be supporting TFCAs with is up on screen: to find, design, and mobilize. And what do we mean about those three different parts to the finance model? When we talk about finding the right finance solution, what we're really looking at is how do we accurately and quickly determine what are the most viable finance solutions for any given context. If we think about it in the context of TFCAs, which finance solution should we be pursuing and which would we be wasting time on? Then once we've identified the right finance solutions for the right place, importantly, we've really landed on the right thing, how do we then move into the design of those finance solutions? And what we mean by design is, how do we implement very unique, often very technically complex finance solutions in a way that we assure that finance increases, but importantly, the amount of finance doesn't just increase, but it's targeted for the point of impact. It's being received by the right beneficiaries, and it's being utilized for the most effective conservation actions on the ground. And in order to do this really successfully and really effectively, we need to be able to have that all hands on deck approach. And that is where the mobilized part of the finance model comes in. And this is harnessing the power of collaboration and collective action. And the coalition hosts a detailed finance for nature ecosystem that covers 19 different sectors, over 5,000 different members and participants, and that allows us to pull on a range of different skill sets for different types of solutions in different places. So just unpacking a little bit more of the finance model in detail, and the reason we spend so much time on this is because it's less about the individual types of finance solutions and more about how we actually develop those. And this is why the finance model is so critically important for stakeholders to understand. And it's exactly what we're going to be using hand in glove with TFCA stakeholders, so that systematically and strategically we identify or find those viable finance solutions, design them effectively, and hold ourselves accountable to milestones and impact parameters, and pull on the resources, both social and financial, to get them up and running. And so what you'll see up on screen now is a breakdown of the find, design, mobilize parts of the model. And you'll see that each part has 3 different steps to it with 3 different tools. And so we've tried to ensure that this is as simple as possible to take the nuanced complexity of nature finance and put it into a 3-part model with 3 steps and a tool set that is designed to be as user-friendly as possible. And I'm going to unpack each of these 3 different things very briefly before we get into the examples of finance solutions. So when we're seeking a targeted approach to financing nature, in order to maximize results, we need to start at the right place. We need to identify the right finance solutions. And I'm going to give a practical example of partners that we work with in one TFCA country. In this particular country, the stakeholders that we are supporting identified a finance solution 10 years ago that they fully believed was going to be able to increase the amount of finance available for their objectives, both social and environmental objectives. And unfortunately, 2025 marks year 10 where that finance solution remains an idea and it is a piece of paper in a feasibility study. And I cannot tell you the amount of times that we encounter this. Many great ideas that remain either as a document or as a small-scale pilot. One of the key missing ingredients to nature finance has been not identifying the right solution or being very critical about the finance solutions that we do want to pursue and asking ourselves hard questions. Do we have all the building blocks necessary in order to take that finance solution to fruition? And by building blocks, what I mean there is the critical success factors. If we look at creating a finance solution like baking a cake, one of the first things you do is put all your ingredients out and look at your recipe. And if we're missing critical ingredients in a finance solution, it's not something that we want to spend time, money, or human resources on. And so the find part of the model, which we do collectively and inclusively with a range of different stakeholders, is to identify what are our top 3 finance solutions. And we have 3 tools that we use for that under find. The inventory is one of them, which my colleague Kyra will unpack in a lot of detail, so I'm not going to go into that now. But importantly, These tools are open source and they're available for the conservation actors that we partner with and stand shoulder to shoulder with. And so when we have identified those top 3 finance solutions, that's when we begin to design them. That's when South Africans would say the tacky hits the tar, and we really start to build and actually concretely develop those solutions. And the design part of the model is strategically put in place as a framework to begin undertaking the detailed design process dependent on the types of finance solutions that we've identified. And we have 3 key components to that, or 3 key steps. The first is to incubate, and I'm not going to give a lot of detail on this, but if we're looking at a finance solution that is a brand new idea, something that hasn't been tried and tested, we need to incubate it first, and that is a process that we put in additionally that takes around 6 months with a niche group of experts to determine whether all those building blocks are in place. But if it's a finance solution that's already sitting in the inventory, which you'll hear more about from Kyra, or it's a finance solution that we're working with a strategic partner with, such as what you'll hear about from Betty from AB Entheos, or a finance solution that's already been through incubation, we know what makes it viable, and we can implement it again and again, like the biodiversity credit work you'll hear about from Rowan, we can then step straight into implementation. And so importantly, the design process that sits in the finance model allows us to replicate finance solutions from one jurisdiction to another. It allows us to implement finance solutions with clear milestones, clear impact parameters, and it really holds us to account in terms of the momentum we need to be driving for individual finance solutions. I think if we opened up the chat now and heard about how many finance solutions were under development or under discussion, how long that process has been, it can take a considerably long time, and we simply don't have that much time to waste. We need to get these finance solutions designed and driven through the design part of the finance model so that we're able to see them reach impact. And what I mean by impact is real dollars in real bank accounts being used by real beneficiaries for the most important actions on the ground. And that is how we measure the success of the finance model. But importantly, the last part of the finance model on the mobilized side is really around the human capital or social capital and resources that we rely on from the Coalition's Finance for Nature ecosystem to do that. We would never expect a new finance solution to become operational without having the technical expertise on board, the government buy-in and policy direction and mandate, without building in local communities and actors on the ground, NGOs big and small. It really requires all of us to sit around the table and get these new finance solutions into place. And a little bit more on the last point there on mobilize, and that is around how do we take finance solutions to scale? How do we ensure that we have that all hands on deck approach? And not just scale with regards to individual finance solutions, but scale in terms of developing sustainable finance for nature at a broad spectrum. And I'm going to touch on that in a bit. Miriam, if you wouldn't mind moving across to the next slide. This is the timeline that we really utilize in order to activate new finance solutions using the finance model. You'll see the find part of the model. You'll see incubate pulled out. You'll see a rough trajectory of a year 1 to 3 for implement, and then ultimately taking us to impact. And we want to ensure that we are taking ideas right the way through to impact in a maximum of 5 years or less. This timeline often seems quite fast on the conservation side of the coin, but it seems quite slow on the commercial finance side of the coin. And so we've really stepped in to be able to bridge the gap between those two sectors and create a meeting of the minds where we're able to develop things that are nuanced and niche, but ultimately be able to achieve financial return and impact return within a reasonable time frame. Thanks, Miriam. The current footprint of the coalition, you'll see, covers East and Southern Africa, and importantly, to pull out TFCA countries that are supported within the coalition network. The TFCA network really spans an enormous array of stakeholders, from governments to individual communities, many NGOs, many experts, and the coalition is able to provide an extensive sustainable finance network into this stakeholder platform. And so we're really seeing through the project that Mariam alluded to, the merging of those two stakeholder platforms, and to be able to facilitate a sustainable finance community of practice that supports TFCAs and has access far beyond the conservation sector into many financial institutions, many different commercial sectors, and to be able to support as many TFCA stakeholders as possible. Thanks, Mariam. So just in summary, the coalition's role, as I've said many times this afternoon, is really there to be able to stand shoulder to shoulder with conservation actors. We cannot implement every finance solution on our own. We need to have as many different organizations and experts building nature finance as possible. And so holding this sustainable finance community of practice within TFCAs is a critical component of that. But there are two keys that we use to help us unlock the power of impact at scale: our finance model, which I've detailed now, as well as the role of individual organizations, both within the financial side of things as well as the conservation side. And we refer to those as finance doers and drivers at scale. Having committed organizations on board to create finance solutions within their own context is absolutely critical if we're going to see nature finance go to scale. If we are reliant on one or two organizations or one or two experts to build finance solutions for nature for us, we're simply not going to be able to move the needle. And so the coalition is there to be able to support the equipping of as many organizations as possible. Thanks, Mariam. So in summary, as I hand over to Kyra, I'd really love for the participants on this call to take one thing home from what I've shared, and that is the fact that we have to have a strategic approach to building nature finance, and we need to be able to do it together if we're going to have any chance at all of filling that massive nature finance gap. So if we can take hold of the finance model as the strategic approach to do that, and we can use our TFCA network to be able to hold that community of practice, I believe that we have what it takes to advance as many finance solutions as possible. So with that, Mariam, I'll hand back to you and then over to Kyra.
Thank you so much, Candice, for the introduction to the coalition and to the finance model and to all of its very important parts. I will now introduce you to Kyra. Kyra is our head of strategy at the coalition. She's an expert in environmental science, but above all, she's a system thinker and she's a creative, and she's the person who is behind everything you see on screen today, on LinkedIn, in our website, and all of our knowledge products around the coalition. She's also advancing work with communities and work with different groups of stakeholders, making sure they come to the table to find those finance solutions. Kyra, over to you.
Thank you, Mariam, for such a lovely introduction. I really appreciate that. I'm really excited to be here today to introduce the Finance Solution Inventory. This is a product owned by the coalition that we launched at the end of last year in its first phase. And it's just a really exciting project to have led and been part of through a lot of collective action and collaboration. The Finance Solution Inventory would not have been possible without a vast array of people with various expertise coming together to put this inventory together to what it is today in its first phase. And the inventory was funded in its first phase by the European Union with support from the UN Convention on Migratory Species. And we're very excited to have been endorsed by the African Leadership University School of Wildlife Conservation. I see Sue Snyman is one of the participants on the call today, so thank you very much. As well as the IUCN World Congress on Protected Areas, Sustainable Finance Specialist Group. And recently we celebrated being added to the 30 by 30 toolkit that's been managed by the High Ambition Coalition for Nature and People. So the Finance Solution Inventory, first of all, it's a first of its kind knowledge hub that with finance solutions that are targeted for conservation. And it is an African-led inventory designed and developed by Africans for Africans. And through this finance solution inventory, this is our key tool that we use undefined to scope the right finance solutions for any given space. You can go to the next slide, Mariam. And this finance solution inventory is intended to be very user-friendly and interactive so that anybody can use the inventory and this knowledge hub to engage in finance solutions. I think for many of us who come from an environmental background like myself and many of you on this call, these finance solutions can seem quite daunting and intimidating, but the finance solution inventory as this knowledge hub is really designed to break down what these different finance solutions are and provide examples of these in practice. And they are displayed in the inventory through this inventory wheel, which when we go through it, you can navigate through in the inner wheel. That's the active one in its first phase. And then in the next phase, we'll go to the outer wheel. And we have a series of knowledge products that really describe then what these different types of finance solutions are at a high level. These knowledge products, which we call solution sheets, are 3 to 4 pages each. We currently have 11 of them in the inventory that are designed to inform a basic understanding of these different types of finance solutions and what they are by providing an aim of each finance solution type, a description of them, what are their different building blocks, which Betty and Rowan will also be unpacking just now, as well as providing specific examples of tailor-made finance solutions. So when we refer to a type of finance solution, as an example, insurance as a product is a type of finance solution. A tailor-made finance solution would be human-wildlife conflict insurance. So the solution sheets explains what insurance is, or what a bond is, or a conservation trust fund, and just describes that and what are their critical success factors to being able to be replicated in other contexts, whether that be in landscapes or in seascapes. So it's wide application of these finance solutions so that we can really try to close that finance gap for nature. Thanks, Mariam. So in the second phase, we're very excited to launch tailor-made finance solution case studies, so expanding on the examples in the solution sheets. In the example given here, we refer to the OECM and threatened species tax incentive, which was launched in South Africa last year. And this is under the environmental fiscal benefits type. So this is just something to whet your appetites on what's up and coming. And again, this is based on huge collaborative effort. So it wouldn't be possible without the amount of innovation from NGOs and the finance sector to get these finance solutions off the ground. And then in the second phase, we'll also be showcasing all of these finance solutions in an interactive map to see where these finance solutions are active, where they can be implemented, so we can see really how Africa is moving the needle on closing that finance for nature gap. Thanks, Mariam. So at this stage, I'm just going to hold on this screen. So if you would like to, you can scan the QR code to access the inventory, or you can just put it in your Google search and look for the inventory yourself. So I'll just wait there for a few seconds, Mariam, and then we can click to the link and I'll just go through it.
Thank you, Kyra. I also shared the link in the chat so people can also click there and go to the inventory. If you experience any issues, you can contact us and we'll guide you through any issues. I'm going now to move on. As Candace presented the finance model and the parts to the finance model, Kyra has shown you an important part of the find part of that model. And both Kyra and Candice spoke about the critical success factors for advancing the finance solutions, customized, tailor-made to the specific places and to the specific needs. To do that, I have two speakers with us today. One is a lady, not to break the ladies we already have today. So we have now Betty. She is a partner of ours at AB and TFCAs. She has expertise in actuarial science and inclusive insurance product design. And she's going to speak to us about her experience in taking this model, the different parts of the model, and taking one typology of finance solution that they've customized and take it to production, let's say, to implementation. So without further ado, Betty, over to you.
Thank you very much, Mariam. I hope you can hear me well. It's a pleasure to be on this call or on this webinar and to meet all of you in the conservation space, something that at AB we are very privileged to be working in. I'm going to talk about the human-wildlife conflict insurance in Africa, and this is going to be done in 4 stages. I'm going to give a brief about AB and TFCAs. Then I'm going to talk about our problem, which is a human-wildlife conflict solution, then the solution, and then the way forward. AB and TFCAs was registered in 2014 with a goal to develop or design sustainable financial solutions that address immediate sort of risks and problems that humans and also nature faces. We leverage 3 business models to do this work that we do. We focus on localized insurance, which is co-creating insurance solutions with communities. We leverage technology in all the work that we do. And we also leverage intense community engagement and education to ensure that whatever we develop is advised or rather informed by the community and also allows them to understand what exactly the solution is going to be about. Next slide, please. This is our big dream at AB and TFCAs, or rather our vision, which is an Africa where people are resilient against risks, have access to financial services and are thriving. In terms of our footprint, which I think Mariam had moved to already, we have worked in 12 African countries. The countries are represented in that map. I'm not going to mention all of them. I believe we are all sort of familiar with the countries, so I'll move to the next slide. And these are some of the partners we have worked with who've supported our growth, both in inclusive insurance and in also finance for nature or insurance for nature. We have the Mulago Foundation, Humanity Insured, the International Institute for Environment and Development, and Pinnacle Fund, to mention, who've supported a lot of our work, especially in human-wildlife conflict insurance across Africa. Next slide. These are also some of the partners we've worked with in terms of all the projects we've worked on across the continent. Next slide. I know I'm doing a very quick run through of our AB. I know Mariam is keeping me on a time crunch here. So I'll talk about a case for human-wildlife conflict insurance across Africa, and I'll mention what the problem is like. I think most of us on this call, being that we're in the conservation space, we've heard a lot about human-wildlife conflicts, and we've constantly thought about some of the ways we can mitigate or address human-wildlife conflict across Africa. At AB, we have used insurance or finance to address human-wildlife conflict. Human-wildlife conflict, the definition is interactions between humans and wildlife that often leads to negative interactions and poses serious threats to food security, conservation efforts, human wealth, and well-being for both humans and wildlife. Human-wildlife conflicts also leads to loss of livelihoods, or rather risks of livelihoods, and threatens wildlife populations due to things like retaliatory attacks. When wildlife comes to attack humans, you find that humans end up killing. So that's also a concern for conservation. Next slide. Some of the drivers of human-wildlife conflict, of course, there are very many, but I've touched on a few that we have found to be some of the leading causes of human-wildlife conflict across Africa. The first one is poor land use planning, which leads to habitat encroachment by human settlements. We also have climate change, which I think has been an emerging risk in the recent few years, where changes in weather patterns due to climate change lead to scarcity of water and food resources, leading to human-wildlife conflicts. There's also lots of competition for space and resources. Both humans and wildlife depend on water, grazing land, and crops, especially in dry areas. And also this is very closely linked with climate change. When there is scarcity of resources due to climate change, we find that there's increase in conflict. Also, increase in population, both human and wildlife, has exacerbated human-wildlife conflicts across the continent. Next slide. Some of the common human-wildlife conflict incidences we've found out through the work we've done across the continent. Crop damage seems to be one of the leading ones, and that is primarily caused by elephants. We also have property damage, which is also primarily caused by elephants in most of the countries we have worked in or rather done research in. There's also the ultimate cost, which is human death and injuries, which can also end up manifesting as death at the end of it all. And then there's livestock predation, especially in areas where people are pastoralists or keep livestock. Those are the 5 major incidences that we've encountered as the main ones. In terms of the size of the problem, and this is to put the financial cost to human-wildlife conflict. Of course, through most of the work we've done, we've realized that getting data on exact actual financial data or economic data on human-wildlife conflict is not exactly the easiest thing. But through some of the work we've done, we've estimated that human-wildlife conflict costs upwards of $100 million. And some of the countries where we have worked in, or rather we see immediate opportunity, we see Kenya, where we are currently piloting a human-wildlife conflict insurance scheme. We have Uganda, we have Tanzania, Zambia, Namibia, where we've already designed a solution, and Botswana. We also have Gabon, which is not pictured here, but it's also an immediate country where we are looking at doing some feasibility studies and research. And looking at that big figure, being that we're talking about finance, we see that it's such a huge cost to governments across the continent. Maybe to also put a figure to the problem, the next slide that Mariam had gone to, we've seen that according to the Global Policy and Perception Insights, a study done by the World Bank in 2023, 72% of African governments responded that human-wildlife conflicts was a major and serious concern in their country. So as much as we see the economic cost, we see that the governments also find it to be a problem. And why would you ask that governments find it to be a problem? Is because even for those governments that have schemes and those do not have schemes, we've realized that they experience certain challenges, which are, I guess you can say, common to governments, which include lack of trust and transparency in running compensation schemes that aim to address human-wildlife conflicts. There's bureaucracy, there's fraud that is very fraught within governments. Sometimes there's slow or zero compensation and sustainable funding mechanisms to sustain compensation to communities. There's low compensation levels, or what you can even call unfair levels of compensation, and verification processes that are often tedious and exhausting to run. Next slide. I'll move to the next step where we talk about the solution that responds to the problem and also the challenge of government-run compensation schemes. At AB, maybe to the previous slide, Mariam. At AB, what we've done through some of the work we're doing, and especially with the launch of our solution here in Kenya, we've leveraged 6 steps, which includes community engagement and education. And this is also very linked to our model. We also have technology linked also to our model, where we do claims verification with the help of technology. We offer a compensation or an insurance solution that responds to these key risks that I had mentioned, including death, injuries, crop damage, property damage, and livestock predation. We also leverage community to keep them at the center of the implementation and both the research. We offer timely and standardized compensation, and we also encourage effective mitigation strategies amongst the community. The next slide that Mariam had touched on shows just a snapshot of what our compensation structure looks like. And this is borrowed from what we are doing in Kenya and also what we've designed in Namibia, where we give a solution that covers death and injury to community members, crop damage cover, property damage cover, and a livestock predation cover. That is how it's explained, but I'll not get into it, but I think we can share the slides later and you can have a deeper look into it. Next slide, Mariam. In terms of our claims verification process, which also responds to the delays and slow compensation and verification processes that has been such a common thread, or a common thread amongst the different countries across Africa, we have leveraged 3 main steps where we use reporting, claims verification, and claims settlement. For notification, or rather for the reporting, we use a USSD platform, which is accessible to most people with any type of phone. You don't need to have a smartphone. You can use it on a feature phone where you just dial. And our community verification officers, some of whom are pictured in the background, some of those we work with in Kenya. And once a claim is lodged, the community verification officer proceeds to the scene of the incident, collects all the data, collects all the documentation, sends it to us as the managers or administrators. Our job is to review the information or the evidence provided and recommend the claim for payment, and the disbursement is done through the community members' preferred method of payment. So that could be either through mobile transfer or account transfer. Next slide. In terms of the way forward, once we've already designed the solution, this is our approach to having the journey of human wildlife conflict insurance across Africa. We begin with a feasibility or country strategy. And in this case, we identify the countries of interest, something we've already done through the map I had shown you of the countries we've already established interest in. We carry out feasibility studies, and then we prioritize some of the countries for implementation. We then move to sensitization, which is done through engagements with different stakeholders, be it the community members, governments, NGOs, CBOs, ministries, and government agencies that are relevant in the conservation space, and also development partners and donors to establish sort of implementation pathways. We then move to the implementation and rollout, where we do data analytics and impact measurement. And next slide. In terms of the key building blocks, and Candice had spoken a lot about this, which are also some of the key success factors. These are some of the things we initially look at before we look at implementing or designing a human wildlife conflict solution in a particular country. We assess the value of the natural assets in this country, so that could be wildlife in this case. What is the cost, economic cost of wildlife to a particular country? Once we've found that out, we find that it's a problem if there's human wildlife conflict, then we do stakeholder mapping and engagement, and this will be speaking to different stakeholders. We establish the existing legal and regulatory frameworks, and I see this is a call that has a lot of the TFCA group, and the legal and regulatory frameworks would also entail establishing whether there could be provisions for transfrontier sort of policies and regulatory frameworks, being that we know that wildlife do not know borders like countries do. We also would like to establish that there is government buy-in and interest, sustainable financing and governance, and expertise in product design and availability of data. Those are some of the key building blocks we leverage towards having human wildlife conflict insurance launched in a particular country. Next slide.
Betty, you have 2 more seconds, so I'm going to censor you and go straight to the slide and ask you to close down with this one.
Yes, I think even this one, I've already touched a lot on it in terms of the countries where we have done a lot of work in, so I'll skip this one, and I think we are actually done. Thank you very much, Mariam, and over to you.
Thank you so much, and we will share with everyone the resources after as well. And now, thank you so much, Betty. So, Rowan, I hope you're ready. Our Chief Barista in the Sustainable Finance Coordination team, but above all, he's a finance leader. He's a fellow coordinator like me. His focus has been with the country of Namibia, but working with the finance model and with different solutions. Today, he's going to expose us to the biodiversity credits. He brings to the table more than 20 years of experience, especially from connection of nature with capital markets, corporate sustainability, and also brings the expertise on the operational side of things. So, Rowan, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mariam. Thank you for the kind introduction, and hello to everybody on the meeting. It's very nice to be here. Mariam, you need to show the screen and not me. So while Mariam gets up on her screen, there we go. So what is a biodiversity credit? So a biodiversity credit is technically a certificate or unit of measure that is durable, measured, evidence-based, additional, and it represents a positive biodiversity outcome. This is the basic foundations of a biodiversity credit. This is developed from the Biodiversity Credit Alliance and forms the discussion that we're going to have today. What is a biodiversity credit not? Or what is it? Is not an offset. This is very important. Purchases are voluntary credits are typically expected to make claims of contributing to or supporting societal biodiversity goals rather than claiming to have offset their own specific effects. So it's important that biodiversity credits thus facilitate payments for protection, restoration, or positively managed biodiversity activities and projects. Next slide, please. What are the building blocks that need to be in place for a biodiversity credit to work in any given project, TCFA, conservancy, etc.? Sorry, I lost my words for a second there. So critically, we've identified 7 of these building blocks. These were identified through an incubation process that was conducted in 2023. And throughout 2024, with me working with WWF Namibia and various others, we sort of reiterated that these are critical building blocks for biodiversity credits. Key is market demand. Why would people buy biodiversity credits? What will make them biodiversity credits? And what is the demand and expectations for biodiversity credits? Robust frameworks. Certification, expectations, calculations, methodologies, everything must be there in place. Robust biodiversity and social outcomes. It's very important that these projects have both. It's not okay for projects to only have one. You cannot just have a biodiversity outcome that at the expense of social outcomes, nor the other way around. And we've learned this from the carbon markets, where effects were so driven by the obsession and carbon tunnel vision that the expense of some of the other outcomes that were occurring, that were sometimes external to those projects. So the biodiversity credit market has really learned from that. Strong project development, project implementation partners, high integrity and governance, so including social safeguards around that, local community involvement, indigenous persons involvement, and most importantly, one of the key issues is equitable revenue sharing models and financial expectations out of the biodiversity credits. Next slide, please. So what are the use cases for biodiversity credits? If we move to the next slide, you'll see there's 8 potential use cases. So global biodiversity targets, critical on the contribution aspect. You said voluntary buyers of biodiversity credits claim to be contributing to. Supply chain, so de-risking your supply chain, identifying areas where you're exposed to biodiversity, such as pollination, water, ecosystem services, and investing in that in a manner that secures or de-risks your supply chain. Carbon credit enhancement. This is another option whereby people are utilizing biodiversity credits to enhance carbon credits and improve valuations. Government policy and goals. So specifically 30 by 30 claims, for example, how can we use biodiversity credits to enhance or improve the 30 by 30? Corporate nature targets, so specifically where companies have come out to say we want to be net positive, or we have some sort of nature investment targets that we want to be involved in. How do they access that with being able to show clear claims, monitoring and evaluation, etc. There's increasingly regulatory requirements. We've seen this out of the UK, for example. There's policy in Australia coming out where there's actually regulatory requirements around biodiversity investment and biodiversity net gains or net positives. Consumer products, so utilizing biodiversity credits or nature investment to enhance the value add of consumer products, whether that's from financial institutions or actual physical products. And then nature positive investments. So this is actually where people are looking to make an investment opportunity or a financial gain through nature positive investments. So next case, please. So what I've done here is looked at what are the potential use cases for TFCAs. So out of the 8, 2 seem to be non-evident. There might be opportunities, but specifically 6 out of the 8 are critical. We've eliminated supply chain because it's very difficult often to link supply chain issues outside of pollination and water provisioning, which if you can highlight how that is direct within your supply chain out of a TCFA, then that would be ideal because that makes life very easy to link biodiversity credits, as well as nature positive investments. The rest is all represent an opportunity for a use case for biodiversity credit within a TFCA. So the Biodiversity Credit Alliance highlights this survey. What are the key issues or what are the key reasons for demand? And we see there that corporate nature targets came out tops with almost 4 out of 5 score, with 5 being highly demanded and 1 being very low demand. Biodiversity targets, 30 by 30, so contributing corporates, enterprises, NPOs, NGOs contributing to biodiversity targets. Formal recognition, so increasing understanding that regulatory requirements are coming into place and expectations. And what was interesting was the least demand was to make a profit or to generate an investment out of biodiversity credits. So this has also been reiterated or reinforced. So this is just an extraction out of Bloom Labs. So they've highlighted or documented 53 biodiversity credit sales that have taken place since, I think, 2022. Of the 53, 41 were done on the back of contributions, whether that was corporate contributions, net positive, or organizations or government contributions to 30 by 30, etc. 5 were undertaken on the back of potential offsetting. So interestingly, we said biodiversity credits are not used for offsetting, yet people are still saying that one of the key reasons why they're buying them is to potentially use them as offsetting. So that was a concern. 3 was unknown. 3 was supply risk, and only 1 out of the 53 transactions was done by an investment corporation looking to potentially generate profits out of biodiversity credits. Next slide, please. So what are the financial institutions' engagements? So I'm focusing here on financial institutions because I think there's an opportunity for financial institutions to play an important role in stimulating demand for biodiversity credits and acting as a market maker or market operator in terms of funding the gap between biodiversity credits in the terms of how do you stimulate demand for products that need to be measured, which means they are already in place, the projects are in place, they're being developed, they're post and they're ex-post development, they're not pre-developed. So capital providers, so you could use project finance, financial institutions such as development banks can provide grant funding towards feasibility studies, towards implementations of projects. They can use project finance mechanisms whereby biodiversity credits are used as outputs or outcomes or purchase agreements. So offtake agreements for biodiversity credits, which can be on-sold to corporates to recover that money. They can be fund managers, so they could technically invest in these projects. Once again, potentially investing early stage de-risking or looking for ways to use biodiversity credits to enhance their funds, to generate net positive gains within their funds around providing new markets or new products to investees. They can be a market facilitator. So one of the key things is liquidity. How do we stimulate market demand? How do we find buyers and suppliers? So we have quite an extensive supply of biodiversity credits coming onto the market. There are a number of projects out there that are looking to do this. How do we stimulate demand? Well, one of the people who is closest to corporates and enterprises are the bankers, are the financial institutions. They could identify demand and create a market facilitator opportunity. They could do risk management and advisory. So looking into their portfolios, looking into their debt exposure, how do they identify where people are exposed to nature, and how do you provide risk advisory and supply chain mitigation? And they can act as a policy advocate or standard setter. So really getting involved in the verification, metrics, etc., and driving these around what do the financial institutions and corporates want, enterprises want out of biodiversity credits. So next slide, please. I want to give an example now of wildlife credits. So these are close to the area I work in Namibia. This is a project that's been going for a long, long time. It's actually a program that constitutes several nature projects that protect, restore, or positively manage biodiversity. These are wildlife corridor protections, so for elephants in particular, species protection, lion tolerance, wildlife zones, so landscape habitat protection. We're putting aside landscapes for the habitat protection, so basically saying we won't be cattle ranching or doing any other sort of agriculture on those areas. And a potential upcoming new credit would be the species protection for wild dogs. So these wildlife credits all have a biodiversity outcome that is measured. They're in place. These projects are in place. They're performing. Their payments are being made on the back of evidence, back of demonstrated positive outcomes. They are durable, they've been ongoing for a long time, and they anticipate to be continuing to ongoing. We've seen this in the sense that the communities have indicated the positive effects of these payments for biodiversity outcomes. And they also show additionality. So they're all positive and they show additionality in the sense that without these wildlife credit programs, those products or projects would not have occurred in those conservancies. So biodiversity credits is a biodiversity outcome that is paid for through the Community Conservation Fund of Namibia. It is currently capitalized through grants from the KfW, and this is important because this is where a financial institution has provided grant funding to de-risk these opportunities, to provide outcomes-based, measured, evidenced certification that can now be used to capitalize these funds again. So providing private investment opportunities to come in, purchase these credits on the back of performance that is already in place, and looking at to then recapitalize this program for ongoing support of those wildlife credits. And I think that was the real goal of what we're having this discussion here, is how can we use opportunities such as blended finance, for example, to drive investments. And that would apply not just for wildlife credits, but for other financial products, including those that's going to be used in TFCAs. So what's our actionable items? So I've got 2 minutes left, strategic steps. So what's critical for us at this point in time is that we need to build capacity. So people need to develop expertise on biodiversity metrics, market dynamics, nature risk, and the use cases for biodiversity credits, especially looking at what are those use cases that we've highlighted for TFCAs, and critically unpack them and look at your TFCAs and understand where can you fit into those use cases. Engage selectively. So engage with existing biodiversity credit projects that are ongoing, learn from them, use them as knowledge repositories, focus in on African initiatives because, you know, where most of us, if not all of us in this group are from African origins and living in Africa. So let's use our African examples. We've got a few with Credit Nature, African Parks, Land Banking Group, all generating credits or projects already. Prioritize high integrity. I don't think I can say this enough. We all speak it, we all believe it, we all feel it, that high integrity credits is the way to go. We're not going to be fly-by-night carbon cowboys. So importantly, let's focus in on high robust standards, social safeguards, and local communities and indigenous people. And then explore a blended approach. This is not a one-size-fits-all, and it's definitely not a one person can solve the problem. If we attack this from a blended approach, get corporates involved, get NGOs and conservationists involved, and get the finance institutions involved, we can create an environment where we can de-risk and sell nature positive outcomes to those who are looking for positive uplift and a good investment opportunity. So that's me. Thank you very much, and I appreciate your time.
Thank you, Rowan. Thank you, Betty. Thank you, everyone. Everyone take 30 seconds to breathe deep and just let all the content we've just poured into you sit down. So we've started with Candace on the who we are as the coalition, the finance model, the 3-part model that we use, define, design, and mobilize. Kyra has walked you through the inventory, and then Betty and Rowan took us through 2 examples of 2 finance solutions through the lens of the building blocks, which are the critical success factors for advancing those solutions in the specific realities of a landscape, a seascape, an institution, or a group of people that want to take that solution forward. With that, we come for, we're right on time. Everyone has been very disciplined, and I thank you for that. And we have now time for questions and answers. Please raise your hand so we can see you. I'm going to stop sharing the screen now so I can see more of you on the screen, and we'll take it from there. Please also use the chat if you need to for some reason, but all questions, there are no wrongs or rights, nor big or small, are more than welcome. So yeah, want to see hands up. Everyone is clear. There's no hands up. Steve, go ahead. Kick us off.
Okay, so thanks very much. It was very interesting. I suppose one of the questions that and I'm interested to know how you as financial practitioners, because I've clearly realized we, from the conservation sector, don't really know how to engage with the financial sector. But the kind of criticism that we are monetizing nature, and we should not be monetizing nature. Do you think that that's a problem, or is it a case of we just need to be practical? And the reality is that if we don't have finances, we don't have resources, communities that don't have access to finances, they don't benefit. I mean, what would you say to that issue in terms of let's not monetize nature like we monetized everything else in the world, including our time, for example?
Thank you, Steve. I'll ask Candice to go first, and then if Betty and Rowan want to come in and complement. Let's go. Candice, while the rest of you in the call, please prepare your questions. Candice, over to you.
Thanks, Miriam. I'm happy to hand that question over to Rowan, because I think biodiversity credits really speak precisely to that issue. But yeah, happy to share a little bit after Rowan has given us his insights.
And he had the whole slide on that one, so as well. Go ahead.
Cool. Thanks, Candice. Steve, it's a very common question that I get. It is not an easy answer because the commodification of nature is a very sensitive aspect. I've been an environmental economist dealing with the equity of externalities and pricing of nature for some 20 odd years now, and it's something that I don't think we've really come to grips with. How do we answer the question? So one of the issues is that nature's already being valued. It's basically valued at zero for predominantly all the transactions that occur. And at zero value, it's getting a really, really bad deal. And we need to sort of undo that. So we've got this fact that if we don't do anything, we're going to be valuing it at zero. On the flip side is that we also the nature credits and the biodiversity credits environment is being driven quite heavily by the nature enthusiastic projects themselves. So a lot of the conservationists are driving these projects. They're being skeptical from a finance perspective. And so what's happening is almost inherently we're seeing that nature at the forefront and as a critical asset is being protected by the design of these products, these actual biodiversity credits themselves. The frameworks, the coalitions that are being put into place, the high integrity requirements, etc., are all sort of being driven from a conservation point of view, as opposed to some of the other credit markets, which have been driven really from a financial point of view and a regulatory point of view, where they've been as fast as possible to try and make profit. So I think there's almost a by design component that we're not commodifying nature, but we also need to sort of unpack it in a way that we understand that if we don't value it and value it properly as an asset, as an infrastructure, that its current value is then zero on the balance sheets and in the corporate's sort of aspects in terms of their production functions. So it's a tough one. We need to self-regulate and focus, and I think that's why there's this really critical aspect on focusing on high integrity, allowing conservationists to drive the design of the product, but also identify how do corporates, what do they want, and how do we match and marry the demand with the supply.
Yeah, so Mariam, maybe I can jump in there just to add to what Rowan has said. I think one of the critical things that we need to realize is that the conservation and finance sectors are finally merging. It's been a missing piece of the puzzle for a very long time, and it's something we've desperately needed in the sector. And as that begins to happen, we have the opportunity to be able to increase the flow of finance. But part of that means making that business case for biodiversity, which naturally means we're going to be talking in financial language. So looking at, what are our natural assets? How are those valued? There's a key component that links to natural capital accounting in that equation. And then importantly, that we need to be able to match that financial language with impact language, which the conservation sector understands so well, knowing exactly what biodiversity and conservation activities need to happen on the ground, and tying those into finance. I think the world of credits, of impact funds, so much of this is not going to stop. It's a huge tsunami wave that's upon us. And so if we want to be able to ride that tsunami wave and not have conservation impact washed away by it, we need to be able to ensure that as financial instruments are designed, which harkens back to the finance model from the get-go, is that how do we tie finance to conservation impact and social impact that is measurable and that's verifiable and it's concrete, and as the conservation sector, we're satisfied with that. Because if we can do that, we not only safeguard impact, but we're able to maximize on the opportunity of finance. But ignoring that component, I believe we do so at our peril.
And that's thank you, Candice, thank you, Rowan. I think that is also where Betty examples comes in, when she's showing us that process of the claim on the insurance and having the community verifiers and all of that. So it's that finance language becoming impact language, because you are customizing to the specific landscape needs. In this case, it was for this human-wildlife conflict, right? We have a few questions on the chat. I'm going to move to that. Please volunteer now for my speakers. Please volunteer to address some of these questions, but I know a little bit who will tend to go to some. So we have from Arnaud, what regulatory frameworks and policies are available in Africa to ensure transparency, sustainability, and equitable distribution of benefits from biodiversity credits? Rowan, do you want to kick us off on that one?
Yeah, sure. I think I actually just typed out a quick answer on that one. So there are no specific Africa frameworks. There's no country that has a biodiversity credit framework that would deal with this. So at the moment, the International Advisory Group on Biodiversity Credits, IAPB, is setting up the high integrity framework and the high integrity principles that govern, or that biodiversity credits should be governed by. So we use those as our test and our litmus test around biodiversity credits. With regards to the equitable distribution and benefits, I think those are also quite specific to the projects and the project development and execution, and so need to be looked at on a case-by-case basis and be driven by sort of the involvement and the ownership of the local communities and indigenous peoples within those areas.
I will ask Candice to complement and to bring her legal hat on it. And I guess she will also make the connection to the building blocks and the importance of the building blocks.
Thanks, Miriam. So I think one of the things that we see time and time again on finance solutions, regardless of whether it's biodiversity credits, human-wildlife conflict insurance, impact bonds, outcomes funds, the list goes on, policy and legislative frameworks create an enabling environment for these finance solutions. So a prime example is what happened in Zambia with colleagues from UNDP Biofin in setting up a green bond framework. This has created an enabling framework to be able to create those types of instruments. So whenever we see legislative and policy frameworks in place, they directly support the development of new finance solutions. And this is, particularly true of the tax work and the fiscal benefit work that's happened in South Africa with very strong legislative and policy frameworks, both on tax as well as on protected and conserved areas. So things like having policy and legislative frameworks available on OECMs opens up a whole new world to be able to create finance solutions for area-based conservation. And so to Rowan's point on the frameworks for biodiversity credits, there aren't any formal policies or legislative frameworks that exist. And so while we see the growth and the starting point around voluntary markets for things like credits, whether it's carbon credits, nature credits, water credits, etc., the voluntary market needs to be given room to grow and space to be able to create those markets and cannot be constrained by regulatory markets, which is where the legislative and policy side of things comes in. However, if that regulatory space falls too far behind, then we run the risk of not having the necessary safeguarding, transparency, and accountability that we need. And so the encouragement to countries across the African continent, and particularly where TFCAs fit together because they hold countries in that very collaborative space already, is how do we set up regulatory frameworks that wouldn't stifle voluntary markets for things like biodiversity credits, but would start to put regulation in place that keeps the transparency and accountability. And so regardless of what finance solution we're talking about, for those involved in the policy space, the legal space, and particularly for our government counterparts in TFCAs, to constantly be looking at how do we create those enabling frameworks on the policy and legislative side, because they put in a building block automatically for nature finance.
Thank you, Candace. Betty, get ready. I'm going to reach out to you next. There's a question there. They are all monopolizing us on credits, but I'm going to bring in some of the insurance, and because you had that example there as well. So Christo is asking us, what are the practical barriers and bridges to youth employment in community-based monitoring? And maybe you could speak a bit based on the experience with the insurance and the claim process, for example, and then I will also hand over to Rowan.
Maybe come again with that question. Come again. Let me see if it's on the chat.
The implementation of these finance solutions create opportunities for employment, especially for the youth in the communities. And I'm asking if you could share a bit on your experience.
Okay, yes. Thank you very much for that, Mariam, and whoever asked the question. So for us, we did actually create and implement, and I'm going to give an example of Kenya, where we have the product, or rather the solution in operation, or rather running. We realized the importance, and one of our key building blocks is community engagement and involvement. And how we did that is through the verification officers. We realized they're the ones who actually do get affected by human-wildlife conflicts. They know the people who get affected by human-wildlife conflicts, and we'd like for them to be involved in not just being the bearers of the problem, but also the implementation and the solution. So in this case, like in Kenya, we employed a minimum of 20 in each of the regions where we are piloting the solution. And of course, that number, as we go along, we find that we can grow that number depending on how many conflicts are reported per county. So for that, we actually do create employment for people who did not have any employment, and we empower the youth to not just understand human-wildlife conflict in another dimension, to understand how it can be addressed through financial solutions, not just maybe indigenous or traditional sort of mitigation practices. So in that case, I think I can say we do have empowerment of communities, and especially the youth, to understand how to mitigate human-wildlife conflict through a financial solution like insurance. I hope that has answered your question in a way.
Yes, it has. Thank you. Rowan, do you want to add anything from your experience?
So I think my experience from the Namibian wildlife is really around sort of the lion species protection, where they use youth rangers and rangers to watch and patrol, and they monitor and track the lions, where they're moving, where they're going. They help crawling when the lions get too close to the communities and to the cattle, etc. The fact is that this is part of the community engagement process, and they have chosen to utilize and uplift these rangers. So I think the practical barriers, it's going to have to be area specific, project specific, and knowledge based specific. So what are the key areas within that area? You know, are we looking at very degraded land where it's difficult to do tracking, and camera traps would be better options than to utilize individuals? Or are we in scenarios such as the wildlife credits, where actually utilizing rangers, upskilling rangers is the positive option? So I'm not sure what the specific practical barriers are, but I would say that we would need to look at those closely on a project-by-project basis.
Thank you. Betty, there's a follow-up question in the chat asking who pays for the community verification officers. Could you speak a bit on that one?
This is part of another building block where we ensured, we talked about sustainable financing and governance. Of course, that comes twofold. There's where you actually create a fund to address, or rather to pay the claims, but then there's also the administration or running such a scheme. For Kenya, for example, it's the government of Kenya that has provided financing to not only pay the claims in the event of a human-wildlife conflict, but also to support the administration of the claims, which means to ensure that the claims are paid on time, to pay the people who are doing the verification. But I think in the long term, depending on where you are, this might not entirely be sustainable. and there is need to look at different strategies or mechanism to finance such a wide scheme. So we could also look at something like biodiversity credits, something that Rowan has talked about, that can be used to complement the fund that would support not just the payment of claims, but the running of the solution, or rather the scheme, which will include the verification officers or the youth who are employed in this case.
Thank you, Betty. So again, there's no one size fits all. It needs to be very specific to where you are working. With that, there's a question again in the chat that I'm going to ask Kyra to come in, which is on involving and working with local communities, especially indigenous populations. Again, Arnaud, we can set up a follow-up call with you, because it's clearly you have an interest on the biodiversity credit, and you're doing the right questions as well. So how do you include these groups in decision-making, benefit sharing processes, not just for biodiversity credit, but other finance solutions as well? Kyra, over to you.
Thanks, Miriam. And yeah, you're right that a one-size-fits-all approach doesn't work. However, there are standard processes to engage communities and look at benefit sharing, which are engaged in. So with each different finance solution, there will be targeted approaches, and we keep to our values and commitments around including communities in that engagement processes, and making sure that the benefits are accrued to the stewards of the land who are on the ground. So, you know, we work with doers and drivers who are committed to those same values, and that supports us. So as Candice mentioned right from the beginning, we can't all be doing this all on our own, that we actually need to pull on each other and the capacity and the skills and experience that we have to really be able to ensure that we are working with local communities and Indigenous peoples, and including them in the decision-making processes. So we do engage in various engagements and workshops to ensure that this is possible, but working with the right people on the ground who have the knowledge and the experience within these landscapes and seascapes to enable us to do that in the right ways, being cognizant of who these different people are on the ground and how they can benefit from these finance solutions.
Thank you, Kyra. And when Kyra was showing us the inventory, she also shows us the finance solution sheets. And you will see the details of the building blocks per financial solution. And if you want to find a cross-cutting team between all of them, you will see that livelihoods and communities are pretty much at the heart of what we do. And we integrate that in all the define, design, and mobilize stages of our work. So I highly recommend you to read some of those as well. We have two questions in the chat that I'm going to use as the closing questions, and ask Candice to share a few insights on both of them. I'm going to pose the questions as one, and then to close, and then hand over to Steve for a few closing words. We're on time, and I want to keep it like that, so everyone mindful of that. So there's two questions in the chat that I'm going to group together. One is that on biodiversity credits again, but I'm going to use the expression finance solution because it's not just applicable to the credit space, but can you use this type of solutions for species in terms of taxonomic groups specific to threat mitigation actions? And there's an example shared there, for example, power line adaptation to avoid collision or execution with birds or vultures, for example. Related with that, we have a question in the chat that says, how do we scale this? How do we take this to the TFCA level? How can we take those finance solutions from smaller projects to TFCA level? And I think you could offer a few insights, and then we transition to the closing. Thank you.
Thank you, Miriam, and thank you for your excellent facilitation, keeping us all on time with military precision. So I think both of those questions, as diverse as they are, ultimately have the same answer. And so every time we need to build a finance solution for nature, regardless of whether it's supporting community livelihoods or the specific interventions for a specific species, such as vultures, whether it's at a localized level or a very large integrated cross-border landscape like a TFCA, we want to ensure that every finance solution is designed for impact and it's built for scale. And often we get caught in the weeds and the complexity thinking, how do we design a finance solution for that specific species? Or how do we design a specific solution for that particular group of people, or for that particular landscape, big or small? And what we really should be asking are the financial questions. We know what our conservation needs are. We know what the specifics are within any given landscape, group of people or species. So really what the finance model is there to do is to support conservation actors on the ground to be able to look at the building blocks, the fundamentals of the finance solutions that are available to them, because they understand their context best, whether it's vultures, or people, or anything else in between. And from that position, we're then able to list the potential finance solutions and, importantly, use the design process to be able to get those finance solutions activated in a way where we're not wasting time, we're not wasting resources, and we're designing those finance solutions at their point of impact. So if we're looking at a landscape that has issues with elephants, we need to do major vulture safeguarding and put protection measures in place. We need to uplift communities. All of those things are happening in real time in specific landscapes. They're not isolated or separated from themselves. So how do we then look at the inventory that Kyra unpacked, look at the different finance solutions available at their most simplistic level, at a building block level, and say, within this particular landscape, for our specific needs, what are the building blocks we have at our disposal? Because very quickly, we're then able to shortlist the finance solutions that are available and then begin to design those, making sure that we design them in a way where they're targeted for the impact that we ultimately want to see the money used for. And by doing that, we automatically answer the second question, and that's how we build for scale. Because what we've seen in our work with AB Entheos, who did their work on insurance in Kenya, we were able to break down that finance solution into building blocks and straight away see Zambia, Namibia, Botswana, the list goes on. They all have the same building blocks. The insurance solution will look different in every different country and for every different landscape, but the building blocks remain the same. And that allows us to take finance solutions to a large scale level, and it allows us to replicate from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, which is a critical issue around TFCAs. And it's exactly why, when working with TFCAs, we want to be able to address impact, and that things are designed for impact on the ground, but we're designing things so effectively that it allows us to increase the impact by replicating them across such large landscapes as TFCAs.
Thank you, Candace. Thank you, Rowan. Thank you, Betty. Thank you, Kyra. So you've come to, you started the journey with us today. You now know and you're aware that there is this EU GIZ funded project that is here to bring this exchanges, this dialogue, this skill building around sustainable finance, using this unique sustainable finance coalition that is Africa-based, Pan-African-based, and using the finance model that brings this apparently complicated finance stuff into 3 doable parts that you can navigate it. It's also, you've learned that it's not a question of choosing one or the other. It's starting the journey of identifying which finance solutions can serve the different objectives and of impacts that you have, and then applying that the inventory, the building blocks perspective to make them progress and unlock the finance flows. Of course, no journey comes without roadblocks. But this is why the expertise you see here in the room, from Steve to Candace to Rowan to Betty to Kyra, is available to support you through those journeys. You will see more of us throughout this year, not just in the webinars. You will see us as well in the summit, the TFCA summit upcoming. We have a boot camp there as well. Candace will also be in a panel, and we look forward for more exchanges and interactions. For the active of you, like Arnaud and some of the others with, you will also get access to our contact details, and we're open and available to bilaterals to take any additional questions. With that, I'm going to hand over to Steve to say goodbye to us, I think. Steve, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Miriam, and thank you for your hard work in pulling this together. We're looking forward to working with you from a TFCA perspective as the coordinator of the program going forward. And as you mentioned, there is the upcoming international conference and Heads of State Summit in Harare from the 19th to 23rd of May. Sustainable finance is one of the issues which is on the conference agenda, but it's there because we also want to give a message to the heads of state in terms of what they can do to enable this. And I take the point that Candace made, that there isn't a regulatory framework, and perhaps that's an area where we can emphasize the need for the treasury departments across the region to be talking to each other, the environmental sector, etc. We know this is a multi-sectoral approach. TFCAs, by their nature, in terms of what you're dealing with, be it from water to rural development to conservation to border controls, is multi-sectoral. So I think that'll be important. I want to say to those of you that have joined today, if you do, the point was made in the chat, if you want to be part of the community of practice that really gets into a bit more detail about the journey we're going to be doing around these TFCAs, please join. You can reach out to me or Miriam or anybody, and we'll make sure you're involved in any of the discussions going forward. I think I was really enthused by the example from Betty. Betty, that was, human wildlife conflict is the key issue, for us. I think we've been really successful to a certain degree within Southern Africa in terms of protecting nature. Now the animals prices, the animal numbers are increasing. We're seeing more and more conflict taking place. And really, unless we can find a way in which those rural communities can thrive without being continually challenged by the biodiversity, we're not going to succeed on this program. So your solution is really great. And we certainly want to find ways we can upscale that across the region. So I think I will leave it at that. Thank you for attending. I think this won't be the first webinar we'll have on sustainable financing, but we certainly will let you know about the other topics we're going to tackle. We are hoping that a part of the summit will be live streamed, so we'll keep you informed about that as well. And then as we develop these solutions and we embark on the journeys with the different TFCAs, we'll keep you informed through our newsletters, through the website, which we are about to relaunch. I think sustainable financing will be a key theme there. So Betty, Rowan, Kara, and Candace, thank you for your presentations. I'm getting my WhatsApp saying, please share the presentations. That'll be part maybe of what we'll do is when we put it on the website, we will share the presentations. But as I have noted, we will put the recording on YouTube within the next few weeks. Thank you, Rory, for being in the background and coordinating the Zoom and organizing the advertising and putting up the video once it's ready. So with that, I will say, thank you to everybody. It is May Day this week. Enjoy your public holiday. Think about what you can do on the finance side while you're relaxing.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.